Hi, welcome to Spiritual Connection. I'm your host, Katie Augustyn. I'm a shamanic practitioner, I'm an energy healer, I'm a transformation coach, and a spiritual leader. And you know, the reason I wanted to start this show, Spiritual Connection, is because connection is really one of my core values. It shows up in many areas of my life. So what we're about is connecting with each other and also connecting more fully with our own spiritual natures. So our show will feature guests coming on to talk about their spiritual journey, as well as the services that they provide to help you on your path. So we're thrilled that you're with us tonight. Thank you for being here. So my guest tonight is Victoria Shaw.
Hi.
Welcome to the show, Victoria.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm happy to have you here. So I'm just going to read a little bit about you to the audience since they don't know you, okay? So Victoria is a psychologist and a licensed professional counselor. She combines her training in counseling and psychology with her intuitive gifts. So this is the difference here. And she works with children, teens, and adults, right? Mm-hmm. So Victoria earned her doctorate in psychology from Princeton and her master's of counseling from Fairfield University, right in our neighborhood. She completed her postdoctoral training in the Department of Educational and Developmental Psychology at Columbia University Teachers College. Victoria is the author of 4 books for parents, teens, and preteens. Wow. And she's also the mother of 2 spirited children.
Right.
Maybe we can talk about them at some point, or maybe not.
Absolutely.
All right, great. Well, you know what? I met you a few months ago, and you told me a little bit about what you do, and I was really intrigued. So I said, please come on and talk to everybody about it. So we're going to get into that in a minute. But before we do, I'm really interested in, like, what has your spiritual journey been like, or what is it about?
Well, I always love that question because in my mind, we're all on a spiritual journey, whether you recognize it or not. We're all spiritual beings rather in physical bodies. And so
That's true.
whether you think of yourself that way or not, at the end of the day, you're there. But for me, in terms of becoming like aware of my spirituality and really opening up to that idea of being spiritual, started mainly, I think, when I moved from New York City to Connecticut about 12, 13 years ago. And I think I always had a sense that I should be doing more. There's something else. There was a calling for me, something there waiting for me, but I didn't really know what it was. I was sort of wrapped up in the business of being a mom of small kids. But you know, something was there. And when we moved, and I kind of got out of the busyness of the city and had a little bit more downtime, had a little bit more quiet, I started to deepen my meditation practice. And when I did, I discovered that I had this intuition, this thing going on. And I discovered that I could read people and know things about people that I really, it wasn't like I had ideas about them, I just knew stuff. And I could read them and have information that there was really no logical explanation of how I had it, I just did. And I realized too that I'd had this information my whole life, but I just wasn't really aware of it, hadn't really thought about it, hadn't really tapped into it. But you know, as a child, I remember people saying things like, "Oh, that's very insightful for a 7-year-old." And I realize now, oh, that was my intuition. So once that started to open up, it really got me interested in everything spiritual. I believe that our intuition comes from spirit, and our connection to spirit. And that sort of sent me on my path, sort of opening that up and exploring and learning more. Listening to my own intuitive guidance has really given me a lot of great information about my own spiritual journey and those of other people, and it's just gotten me real excited about the topic.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, we all have intuition.
Yes,
I mean, and we can just develop it or not. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, I think everyone has their specialties and everyone has their ways. I mean, I think everyone's intuitive because, you know, like I said, I think we're all spiritual beings in physical bodies, and I believe our intuition is our connection to our spirit, to our higher selves, to God, however you want to think of it, that works for you, works for me. But intuition's like our spiritual GPS, and everybody's got that. But I do think that different people experience it in different ways, and it can become more important, you know, on your, how do I say this? Some people, you know, would go as far as it's almost like being psychic. Other people It might be more ordinary, but it's always there. And for me, I think that intuition and tapping into it and getting that information is just so important to my life path and what I'm here to do, that it might be more pronounced for me, but everyone has it and everyone can use it. So one of my joys is helping teach people how to tap into their own intuitive gifts, however that looks for them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So then you got into the counseling after that. How did that work? What was that?
Yeah, so the intuition opened first. And as I started to work on that and kind of, rediscover that gift, I realized that a lot of the information that came through for me about other people was of a healing nature. And it felt a lot to me like counseling. And because I was already a psychologist, I'm a research psychologist by training, I thought, I really want to ground this in something. I really want to have the skills if I'm going to work with people and I'm going to give them information about childhood traumas or their relationship with their mom and how that's impacting them now or things like that. I wanted that to be grounded in, something like counseling, so I would have the skills. And so as this developed, I decided to go back to school and get my master's of counseling so that I could have that piece of expertise as well to work in service of my intuition and the healing work that was coming to me already.
Oh, okay. So that's okay. Now it's more clear to me. That's how that's an interesting. But so it's a really interesting combination.
Yeah.
And how does it work for an individual? Say, like maybe an example. How do you do it?
Well, every session would be different because every person's different, and every person's different in the moment they walk into your office. Their needs change and shift. So I don't like to have a formula. Because I think that would be really limiting to me. And again, when you follow your intuition, you're very much in the present moment. You're very much tuning into the now. And that's the beauty of it. So, there's things that happen a lot, there's things that happen rarely, but I don't ever go in with a formula or a set plan, just a vague idea of where we might be going. And then I let my intuition and what I'm getting off the client, right, and their guidance kind of pave the way. But sessions depend partially on my clients' goals. So some people will come to me just for an intuitive reading, and that looks like me tuning into their energy and just giving them information that comes to me. But a lot of the work that I do is a little bit of both. So it's a little bit of counseling. People will come and they'll tell me a little bit about their story, or they won't, but they'll tell me what their goals are, and we'll kind of work together. And I'll share information and guidance that comes through to me, and they'll share what they're getting, what they're feeling. I might incorporate different counseling tools that I've been trained with. Again, I usually use my intuition. I always use my intuition to tell me which ones to use. I've been trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. I've been trained in EMDR, which is a therapy, trauma therapy. I've been trained in lots of different things. And sometimes I just make stuff up. But I always, again, follow my intuition, and we kind of weave it all together to reach people's goals.
So do you have a sense of how it differs from traditional counseling?
That's such a good question. If you look at the history of traditional counseling, you'll see that a lot of the founding people, like even Freud, Jung, Carl Rogers, who are some big names in the fathers of the field, many of them talked about intuition, at least indirectly, and these kinds of experiences. And I remember, this is kind of a funny story, but back in my day as a research psychologist, I remember hearing about all these like Freudian concepts and hearing all these things that these psychologists, these clinical psychologists were doing, and thinking, well, that's not very scientific. That sounds like really woo-woo. And now
that's funny.
And now I know with this different hat on, I'm way more woo-woo than that. But it's true that a lot of, healing is an art, and psychotherapy, psychology, counseling is an art. And so I think, we've always been aware of things like energy, and we've always been aware of a lot of those things. And so in that respect, I think these things line up beautifully, right? And that's why, the intuition and the information that I got, my guidance that I get is counseling, but that's probably where counseling started in the first place.
Wow.
So that's part one answer to your question.
Yeah.
I think some counseling today can be very formulaic, which sometimes is helpful and sometimes is not. I also think sometimes at its worst, and I'm a big fan of what I do and what other people do and the way that they do it, and I think most people in my field are fantastic, and there's lots of evidence that counseling, even without the quote-unquote intentional intuitive piece, is fantastic. But sometimes I think that we get into the habit of telling our story so much and talking about what's wrong so much that it can become very limiting.
You mean as a client seeking counseling?
Right, and as a therapist, right, we get so enmeshed in those problems and problem talk that sometimes people have had years of therapy and all they've learned is that I'm so messed up.
So they haven't gotten very far.
Right, they've
progressed
defined the problems, but that's become their story about themselves.
I see.
So I'm really about empowering people and helping us work through and let go of those stories about ourselves. And so you get the information, maybe that, when I was a child, I had this experience and that's why I feel triggered now, but then we move through it and we let it go.
Right, you don't get stuck in the story.
Exactly.
It sounds, I'm trained as a transformation coach.
Okay,
and it sounds very similar.
Absolutely.
That's what it's all about, empowering the client. And so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that sounds really, really helpful. And you work with, you said, adults, teens, and children?
Adults, teens, and children, about 3 and up.
About the same ratio of each, or?
I would say over the years that I've been practicing, I'm probably about 50-50 teens and adults, but it varies. It depends on who walks into my office. But I have in my office, I have a playroom. I have play area outside. I have a lawn I have a garden. So with the kids especially, we do a lot of interactive stuff too. And I work with a lot of teenagers. I work all across the board.
And your practice is in our area?
I'm in Westport.
You're in Westport, yeah.
And I work with a lot of clients over the phone too, mostly adults and teens, but I do a lot of work with people all over the country.
Okay, so you can do it remotely, yeah.
And then I do more coaching or consulting.
Like the same way we do with coaching. It's
exactly,
very similar.
And that's when I'm doing more of that intuitive healing work.
You don't have to be there in person.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So are your typical clients looking, do they kind of know what they're looking for? It sounds like they do.
I get a lot of phone calls for the same kind of issues that a regular counselor would get. And again, some of my clients are aware of the full tools in my toolbox and some aren't.
That's what I was going to ask you next.
Yeah. And I would say now, when I first started practicing, I was, probably in my counseling work, because I've done intuitive consulting too. I do both things. So I was doing two different things in parallel, and most of my counseling clients were just interested in the counseling piece. Now I have many more people. I would say about 70+% of my clients know everything in my toolbox, and they're coming to me for that reason, which is awesome, because then I can just really play and have fun. But I do still have people that will call me based on a reference, and they have no idea about this intuition thing. And it still works.
Right, because you don't have to necessarily be so overt about it,
Absolutely.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
As long as they're being helped.
Absolutely. And I believe everyone
that's the key thing.
in a healing art, and probably in everything that anyone can do, but definitely in the arts and healing professions, if you're doing a good job, you're tapping into your intuition, right? Because that's really where all the work comes. It comes from that connection. So there's lots of therapists out there, whether they think they're doing that or not, are doing that.
So they may not be aware of it.
Yeah.
Was it talked about in counseling school?
I was really lucky. I made the choice to go to Fairfield and do counseling, which is sort of the new kid on the block, versus psychology, which is sort of the older kid on the block.
Yeah.
Because I wanted that freedom, and it's a new field, and I felt like it was super open. So I was really able to let my freak flag fly throughout my program and say, this is what I do, and talk about my work, which was wonderful. I was able to do presentations on the chakras and
nice.
Yeah. So
but it wasn't part of their program.
It wasn't part of their program, but I did have a course on spirituality and counseling. So it was part and Fairfield, I think, is putting together a certificate on that for therapists. So it's out there. We're getting there.
That's cool. Well, aren't they Jesuit? Is Fairfield?
Fairfield is Jesuit, but the class was not. It was very much.
It's non-denominational, or not even religious at all.
Yeah, it was what you would think of as spirituality and counseling. Talking about everything from Reiki to what I do to shamanism. I took a class basically on shamanism when I was there as well. So yeah, I guess it was incorporated a lot.
Yeah, I guess so, but it was probably optional for people that.
Yeah, those were both advanced classes.
They were, what do you call it? Electives, I guess.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But they were open to your sharing what you had to offer. That's great. That's good to know. That's really good to know. If anybody asks, that's a good program
to
go to. Yeah. So, so we talked a little bit at the beginning about how everybody has intuition and they don't necessarily know how to use it. And you said sometimes you help people with that.
Absolutely.
How does that work? What do you?
Well, first of all, I find when people work with me, it's kind of a monkey see, monkey do situation. And as I'm tuning into my guidance and my client's guidance, I'm aligning them with their own higher self and their own guidance. And so just by being around people that do this work, it opens up in you. So I find that my clients become more intuitive without me having to purposefully do anything.
Wow.
And I found that at my own self too. That I worked with a life coach that was intuitive, and I work with various teachers, and some of it's just vicarious learning. I also have workshops where I teach people, groups of people, how to tap into their intuition, and we talk about what is intuition, and I give them tools. That's one of my favorite things that I do.
Oh, that's great.
And I do that for children, teens, and adults.
So you do that regularly?
I do. I try to do like 1 or 2 workshops a year. I have a group for healers, people in the healing arts that want to tap into their intuition more, that meets regularly. And I do a book group where we read books around intuition, and that is, I think, helpful for a lot of people in opening their intuition too. It's a really fun group.
Yeah, so how does that work? Tell me more about that.
We read different titles about intuition and
Like
spirituality.
an example, can you think of anything?
Last month we read a book called The Initiation, which was about, that's going to be hard to explain. It was a really cool book about, she was a healer, I guess, in Hungary and Switzerland, World War II era. And it was about her own awakening and her having memories about being initiated in ancient Egypt.
Oh, okay.
And we read books sometimes. We've read a lot of Sonia Choquette's books and books about specifically aimed at awakening your intuition. But we pretty much run the gamut of intuition and spirituality, and it's a lot of fun.
And you meet once a month?
We meet once a month.
And about how many people are in their group?
It varies. I have a mailing list of about 100 people, 150 people, but
Just some
yeah,
people.
it varies.
Random.
We might have 5, we might have 15. It's
Yeah. So it's
nice.
not the same people every month.
Yeah, it
like
varies.
my book group, it's the same people
It's the same
every
people
month.
every month. No, I leave it to whoever wants to come, because sometimes you feel called to read a
Right.
book. I've had people come once because that was, they just really felt called to that
To that
particular
specific,
meeting.
if they're
Yeah.
interested in that topic.
Yeah, and a lot of people are on the list, and I know they read along with us, but they just don't have time to come to the group, and that's fine too.
But it's open to anybody who is interested.
Absolutely.
So people can access this on your website.
Yep, it's there.
Yeah, I think we're going to show your contact info
Yeah.
probably at the end of the show, or
Right.
maybe in the middle of the show. Maybe,
Wherever you want to do it, I'm good. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But it's great to have that resource in our community, because I don't think I've really talked to anybody that does that that I can think of.
Every once in a while, someone will call me and say, is there someone else in this town that does what you do? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a common.
It's not. It's not.
yeah.
It should be, but
Yeah. So I wonder if there's an opportunity for, like you have your regular workshops about helping people tap into their intuition. I wonder if there's something that could be taken further and formalized to some extent.
yeah.
I don't know, it sounds silly because you don't need a certification to
Yeah.
use your intuition.
Yeah, I mean,
Something
people
a little
do
more
that.
formal. I don't
People
know.
do it. I mean, for me, my feeling was I had all my credentials, my left brain credentials, and I was fine with that. I think the left brain world is about credentials. For me, for the intuition, I've been a little bit stubborn about not wanting any credentials, because I feel like, your intuition is your connection with you. Yeah, and what I do is what I do, and I can learn from what other people do, and I love to learn from what other people do, but no one can teach me how to tap into my own spirit and my own way and my own inner healer.
That's a good point.
So, and again, I don't begrudge other people that do it, because there's great people out there and great information, but for me...
So there
It
is
was
something that
important.
exists in
Oh,
that.
yeah. Yeah, there are different people.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I never really thought about it, because
Yeah.
it does seem kind of a natural process that's more personal.
Yeah, that's
To
how
me,
it has
yeah.
been for me.
Okay, wow. So what other, any other kind of workshops that you've been doing lately? Or
I haven't been doing this one recently, but we have to get back in the mood. We do, I do one, I usually do this once or twice a year for people that are intuitive empaths. So empaths, intuition presents itself to everybody differently, and there's lots of different ways that we feel it, right? Some people feel it as a body sensation, right? You get the chills, you get a weird feeling in your stomach, right?
right.
Other people, hear voices. I just did a really cool study at Yale about people that are clairaudient, right, where they hear their guidance and they hear their information, and they're doing wonderful research where they want to look at people that hear information that it helps them and people that hear voices that are not helpful. And so I was participating in they're doing a fantastic work there. So I just did that, a survey, because they're trying to find ways to distinguish the two so they know who they need to help and who's just fine.
How interesting, yeah.
But a lot of people hear information that way. Other people have visions. They see things. They see auras. They have, visual imagery in their mind. And another way that a lot of people get intuitive information is through their emotions. So they'll feel the feelings of others. It's super common. I think it's becoming even more common as our world is kind of shifting and changing, and more people are becoming more heart-centered. But I work with a lot of people that are and I was like this, intuitively empathic, meaning, they don't just guess what someone else is feeling, but they feel what other people are feeling.
Oh, wow.
And the downside of that is it can get really confusing, because you can be picking up what other people are feeling as if it's happening to you and not have a clue that it's not yours. Okay? It happens a lot to children where they've just become, and my story was a story of a child who was so overwhelmed from my intuitive empathy that I didn't know, I couldn't even pick up on anything else, because I was just so overwhelmed by the feelings and the pain in the world and my family, and I would walk in the grocery store and be overwhelmed by that. So
that can be confusing.
It's very
for a child,
confusing.
I would think. Yeah.
And a lot of times too, when you say to somebody, even someone again who's not woo-woo at all, never thought about this, if I say to a child do you think maybe you're one of those people that feel like if someone around you is upset, you feel like it's happening to you, you'll get that knowing look. People will be like, yeah, that's me. That's, and I've had adults say, you just said the story of my life. Thank you for sharing that.
And not that many people are aware of it, probably.
Exactly, right.
So you feel like you're the only one.
Right. And it's a beautiful gift because it helps you be empathic. It helps you really, it's a great heart opener for individuals in our society, but you need to learn how to manage it so you don't become overwhelmed and sometimes even physically sick. So I do a workshops. I try to do that at least once a year just on that topic, and helping people that identify as empaths or know someone who they think is empathic. What are the tools and strategies that you need to manage and turn this into a gift?
Speaking of gifts, do you think there's a little connection there between giftedness, meaning high intelligence, and this
empathy?
Intuitive empathy, empath?
I think it can be. I think gifted children bring to the table often a lot of, gifted traditionally is intellectual achievement, usually is measured in an IQ test. And a lot of times gifted children also bring other gifts to the table and other awarenesses. And
there's a lot more to it than just the intelligence.
I know.
You know that.
I do know that.
But you're right, that's what people think.
That's what people think, yeah. And I think that intuition can go along with that. Intuition can sometimes be opposed to that, because some people that are so much in their thinking, intellectual brain, it can be hard for their intuition to get through to them.
That's true.
And we have some kids too. I work with a lot of kids on the autistic spectrum. So a lot of times you'll see children who used to be called Asperger's. The definition has changed, but these are really high functioning autistic children who are on the autistic spectrum, but very smart, very verbal. And a lot of times those kids, we think about autistic people as not having empathy. But in my experience, many, many people on the autistic spectrum have tons of intuitive empathy. They're the kids that if mom is crying, they run over and grab you. They don't have that social cognitive piece. So they don't always understand the cause and effect.
Right, the connection.
Right, but emotionally they're incredibly empathic. And sometimes, again, they can be so overwhelmed by that information that it's sort of blocking their social cognitive abilities.
It just stops them. So do you counsel?
I do. I work with a lot of kids on the autistic spectrum, learning issues, super gifted kids. I work with a lot of kids that might be identified as attention deficit disorder. A lot of anxious kids are empathic, and they're just picking up what's going on in the family or what's going on in school.
Maybe that's causing their anxiety.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Do you find that this might be an impossible question to answer, but that anxiety is generally increasing in our teenagers and our young people?
I think that the research is yes. In my own experience, it hasn't. I haven't been practicing so long.
Right.
I also think that we're just more aware of it. So I work with a lot of adults where when we start to talk about their childhoods, we see that they, were super anxious. I mean, really off the charts anxious, but people weren't paying attention. People weren't treating it like the same. I think there's so much more openness now to therapy, to supporting, to, talking about these things and to working on these things, whereas before we would have just said, that person's being willful, that person's quirky,
just give them a different label.
Person's too sensitive, and now I think we actually are more able to identify and help people.
Well, and also be proactive about
Yep.
it. I think it's terrific that there's such a shift to focus on social emotional learning in the schools.
Yeah.
It's like how important that is, and
Yeah.
I was just reading an article in the paper this morning about that. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
they're piloting some stuff here in
That's
Norwalk.
fantastic.
And Yale's done so much work on that with Mark Brackett. And,
So important.
yeah, they were saying that they hope that Connecticut will be a leader in this area, especially in the schools.
Me too.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm psyched about it. So it's really, especially with the gifted population, to me it's just critical.
I do think one thing that's shifted now from our childhoods and from my childhood is kids are a lot more programmed now. They're, especially in this area, they're a lot more scheduled, they're a lot busier, and there's a lot more academic expectations on them from an earlier age. So I think that does take a toll.
Yeah.
Kindergarten used to be half day, and we used to play games and have blocks, and now kindergarten is full day in most communities, and it's academic. You're expected to be ready to read when you walk in the door.
Yeah.
And it continues throughout, and especially in this area, I think there's a lot of pressures on kids to achieve.
It's all over the country.
Yeah,
but
I think so.
Yeah, here where we are in Fairfield County,
right,
Connecticut, I think it's especially. Yeah, I remember my son is now grown, but when he was in high school, I remember the conversations,
right,
or the lack of conversations. Like, I don't want to go to school,
Yeah, it's not for every kid, and especially boys and young boys, even really smart boys. We know emotionally boys sometimes and intellectually boys lag a little bit behind girls in those early years, and sometimes for a lot of boys, kindergarten and academic kindergarten is not developmentally appropriate. So I'd love to see a shift away from that.
Yeah, and the same thing at the end of high school, when it's time to do something else.
Right.
And some of the communities here, I think things are shifting, so I'm happy about that, but it seems like for years it's been, well, it's college or nothing.
Right.
It's not only that, it's like, has to be a top-tier college, whatever,
One of my favorite services that I offer and my favorite things that I do is I do intuitive college consulting. And so kids will come in with their list of schools, and I will tune into my intuition, and I'll tune into their guidance, and based on that, I will give them a read of each school. And it's amazing to see the shifts in the way that they think about things and the way they think about these schools when the information comes through. Because oftentimes it's not what they were thinking at all.
Yeah.
Right? And it gives them an idea that college is, or whatever you do, because it doesn't have to be college, right? But wherever life path you have is very unique to you. And, we get where we go no matter what roadblocks we put and what path we follow. You're going to end up where you need to be at some point. But it's a lot easier if you can tune in to what your soul has in mind for you and accept and love that and honor finding that match and that place that makes your heart sing.
That's really helpful.
So,
this is terrific, Victoria.
It's really fun.
Well, we're going to wrap up, but I'm so happy that you were able to share all this with our audience.
Thanks. And this was really fun.
They can find out more on your website, and I'm sure you'd be happy to talk on the phone with anybody if they contact you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks
My
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight for Spiritual Connection. I'm your host, Katie Augustyn, and we'll see you the next time. Blessings.